Welcome to episode 12, and today we are talking about powerful visual storytelling. So, whether you're a food photographer, blogger, stylist, artist, or even in a corporate job, every time you put out a piece of content, whether it's a photo, it's a piece of art, even a recipe, everyone wants to know the story. And people don't just want to know the story, they want to be in that story. They want to feel like they're a part of it. They want to experience it in real time and feel as though they are in that moment. And when you're able to achieve that, my friend, is called visual storytelling. Hello. This is your host, Yudhima, and welcome to My Food Lens podcast, where we talk about everything from food photography, styling, to business and mindset. After 15 years as an architect, I switched careers and I'm now a professional food stylist and food photographer based in Singapore. I'm also the founder of the business My Food Lens, where we help clients elevate their brand through drool-worthy photos. My motto is, put your best food forward. Well, here on this podcast, I promise to keep it raw and real and hope you find your answers, action, and inspiration as we move through the episodes. Creating visually powerful photos that transport our audience and make them feel as though they are in it real time is how I define storytelling in photography. Now, everyone has their own way of defining and interpreting this whole idea of storytelling. But this is how I break it down for myself. And it's for a reason. In the beginning, I struggled a lot. Every time I spoke to a photographer, every time I was on social media, I would hear the question, what's your story? What are you trying to tell? What is the storytelling here? And I would draw a blank. I'm not kidding. And so I was so new to photography. This whole concept of visual storytelling was very alien to me. I would create a photo. So I had an architectural background and I would create a photo like with props and colors. And I just followed what looked good aesthetically and proportionately. So I was very clueless in the beginning, especially, but I moved forward in whatever way that worked for me. I slowly began to understand what was the importance of using relevant props, certain colors, what were they doing to my photo? And most importantly, I think what was a real breakthrough for me was that the more I worked with clients, the more I understood my role as a food stylist, food photographer, and what they expected me to bring to the table, even though I didn't know then, but they literally expected me to bring their vision, their story to the table. So I would be given like concepts or the art direction by clients, and I had to create the compositions around it, right? That was my job. And it was very critical for me to nail their vision because my photos would sell their products. I mean, there was a lot on the line. So while I had to bring my artistic side to the table, I had to understand the client's vision and I had to communicate it to the customers through my photos. And somehow I began to use the same process for my personal work too. So I became really intentional. I began to start working with a vision and I began to create a story around that vision for my personal work. Now, if you had asked me at that time, I would not have used the word story around that vision. But today I can tell you that, yes, I began to create a story around that vision, even for my personal work. And I'm not exaggerating, but honestly, I saw such a huge change in everybody's reaction to my work. And that's how I realized, okay, this is working. I'm definitely doing something right. I saw the reaction of my audience on social media. They began to relate to my work. They felt inspired. And there were so many of my mentors in the photography world who reached out and they said that they really saw a big leap in my photography. They saw a huge change in how it had improved. That was big. It looked like I was hitting all the different sides of the nail. I had happy audience, I had happy clients, and I was making progress with my art. So that was a moment to reflect. So I paused. I paused for a moment to kind of soak it all in. And it struck me that in the process of interpreting vision and creating for my clients, I had actually developed a process for myself to communicate the ideas behind my own photos. I had started creating visual stories. I was storytelling in food photography. I had not only understood, but also executed a concept, the concept of storytelling that was so alien to me that I couldn't wrap my head around. And now I was totally rocking it. So that was the practice of demonstrating powerful visual storytelling in food photography. That was the concept that I had a grasp on. So every time someone tells me today, how they like my visual storytelling or how vivid my photos are or the emotion that it evokes in them or how it transports them into a new memory, I just smile silently because I know how much I struggled with it in the beginning, which is why I want to share this practice with you, because I know that this is a huge struggle for many of us, and especially those who are new to photography, who don't have an art background, who probably come from finance or engineering or medicine. We are used to a very scientific way of working, and something so abstract and artistic is a little bit different for us to wrap our head around, which is why I want to share my practice with you, because I've made it extremely straightforward, very practical, easily executable, the way I broke it down for myself and the way I've come to where I am today. There's a long way to go, but I feel like my approach has helped me so much. It's literally like a step-by-step approach where you don't feel the pressure or the overwhelm around this whole big concept of storytelling. And literally you can create such captivating visuals. And you know what's most important? By using the step-by-step approach, you can easily replicate the idea in each and every work that you do, whether it's your personal work or for a client, or whether it's a product shot or it's a large composition, food photo, recipe, whatever it is. Being able to replicate your idea of storytelling, being able to make this a part of your process, a part of your art. Now that's what we are striving for. And that's why I want to share with you the step-by-step approach. All right. So storytelling is actually very easy if you move intentionally and thoughtfully through it. I mean, that is pretty much true for everything in life, right? So I'm going to give you a few steps, and this entire process might take you 20 to 30 minutes, but I kid you not, it is so worth your time. All right, so let's get started. Step 1, determine the message or emotion that you want to communicate. All right, so that's our step number 1. Now, if we want our audience to experience a certain photo in a certain way, we have to know what we want our audience to experience, right? So when we know what food or drink we are going to photograph, we just need to take a moment to think about the message that we want our audience to take away from that picture, and what we want that picture to do, right? So what is the purpose of that photo? Like, do we want to create a photo that brings up nostalgia, or we want a photo that inspires our audience, or we want to make them want to try our recipe or to make that particular recipe, or perhaps we are, trying a new style of photography and we would love our audience to feel inspired to try that style. So what is the purpose of our photo? Knowing this or establishing this in the beginning is utmost important. And even if we only are, creating for a personal work or as a hobby or blogging or as a part-time business, even then we need to know what our message is and how we can actually communicate it in what we create. So a few years back, my dad gifted me a book on photography. It was his photography book, and he's a fabulous photographer, all right? So he had this book for years. He had cherished it when he took up photography. And so when I took up photography, he passed it on to me as a blessing. Now that book had emotion. It was from my dad, and it was also a gesture that would relate to many photographers. So I decided to photograph that book. But I not only wanted to bring out, this heartfelt gesture that my dad had gifted this to me, but I also wanted my audience to be able to imagine and visualize how I read that book. So it was not just about the emotion, but it was also about transporting them into a moment where I would be enjoying this book gifted by my dad. All right. So I knew that I wanted to communicate the loving emotion, but I also wanted to leave my audience with a mental visual of how I would be reading that book. That is how I would make them possibly feel like they were part of this beautiful exchange, that they were in that scene with me. So that was my idea. So my message and intent for the photo was literally to bring forward emotion and memories behind the book and to create a composition that would immediately tell my viewer how I'd read the book. All right, so I was very clear here. That was my step number 1 of determining my intent, my message, and emotion to be communicated. And that's what you need to do. You need to keep your audience in mind and what you want them to feel. So what is the action you want them to take? Do you want them to look at a photo and feel inspired? Do you want them to feel compelled to try that recipe? Do you want them to think about about their childhood and to instill memories? Or do you want them to look at the photo and be ready to buy your course, your ebook, or your mentorship, or your product, or whatever it is? So you need to know the purpose of your photo and you need to create with intention. You have to start with intention. And I know it might sound a bit philosophical, which sometimes I do, but this really helps in the beginning because you're clear in your head. This is really the foundation of how you'll make your decisions going further. All right. So now we go to step number 2. So step number 2 is all about determining the key components that create a story. This step is really about decluttering your thoughts and just nailing down the most important components in your photo. So don't get distracted. Stay focused. All right. So I'm going to go back to my photography book story. So in step number 1, I had decided that I wanted the image to instill warmth. And I also wanted to help my audience to visualize how I read that book. So in step number 2, I actually had to think about how I read that book. So most of my reading happened in the morning with a cup of tea and sometimes with a breakfast on the side. And that's how it happened in real. And that's how I wanted to communicate it in my story. So it was easy, right? It wasn't too abstract or too out there. So apart from the book, what was the main component in the photo that I needed to think about? Well, if it's a breakfast, if that's when I'm reading my book, then definitely I need to think about breakfast and tea because that's what would go into the frame and that's how I experienced the book. So that's what I wanted my audience to experience as well. So with all that information, my most important components were tea and breakfast. So now usually my breakfast is quite simple. It'll be like a croissant, toast, oats, something. But if there's a cup of tea, it's usually croissants or toast. All right. So that's what I chose even for my photo, which was very true to the way it happens in real life. So at the end of this step, I already knew that I would have a book in the frame. I would also have a cup of tea or maybe a few cups of tea. I would have croissants or bread or croissants and bread. And so those were the main components that I would have. And I decided to stick to them and not deviate as I created my story in the further steps so that it was all cohesive. Now that is very important. So I didn't go on adding more elements in this step at all. I just wanted to stick to, okay, here are the 3 main things that will go into my frame. And that's it. Now let's go on and decide the next thing that comes in. All right. So step number 2 really helps us to channel down the main components of our frame that will tell the story in the most powerful way. All right. This step will actually help to make your step number 1 stronger and deliver the message or emotion that you've already established in that step. All right. So in my case, it was croissants and bread that I needed to buy, but sometimes it could be food that I need to cook. So in another way, this step also helps you to understand whether you need to run to the grocery store, whether you need to make preparation in advance, whether you need to cook something in the kitchen. So by establishing the key components of a story, we achieve clarity and we can prep better, not just for our idea, but also for the physical execution of the photography, right? So we begin to slowly visualize that scene ourselves, and we begin to create an image in our minds. The thoughts and ideas slowly begin to brew, and we begin to imagine a composition in our minds, which is what takes us to step number 3. Okay, so step number 3 is a real fun one, and I feel it's a really important one, but I've made it very fun for myself. So step number 3 is about deciding the theme and giving it a name. So now that you know your message, which you established in step number 1, you also know the main components that you will be using, which you decided in step number 2. In step number 3, just for this exercise, you create a theme for yourself and you give it a name. All right. So I usually assign themes based on the food and the emotion. So usually my themes are like, let's say a theme can be luxe. All right. Which means it shows fancy food or props and it looks quite expensive or exquisite. So the other theme that you can think about is rustic or homely or maybe education. Like it can be anything you want as long as it helps you narrow down your concept and take your decisions. And it even gives more clarity when you give the theme a name. So for example, it can be a kitchen scene, a preparation process, an evening cocktail scene. So it can be anything that you want that makes you really get into the whole concept, into the whole story. All right, so I'm just going to go back to my photo. So my concept about the book that I was to read during breakfast while eating croissants, right? That was my concept. Now, the natural theme to me seemed like home. So it was very homely. And I named it Breakfast Scene, a no-brainer, right? And immediately it was clear to me that I had to create a breakfast scene that looked like it was set up in someone's home. It was very relatable. It was exuberating a breakfast vibe. And this was all coming from the whole idea that I'd established in step 1 and step 2. I knew that's how I read my book. That's the emotion I wanted to give to my audience. And so it just was going step by step and breaking it down little by little by little. All right. So the breakfast scene name and a homely theme is what I established. So when you're going through these decision-making questions, please do not try to complicate it for yourself. Give yourself answers and parameters that actually help you visualize and create that story easily. So keep it simple. As you use this approach for each photo, your themes can overlap. You can have 2 photos that might have the same theme of homely or luxe or rustic or whatever. You can even use the same theme names. It doesn't mean that it has to be unique every time. It just means that that is your story. That is what you're trying to tell. All right. So in your mind, you can actually start positioning yourself inside that composition, inside that story, and imagine how powerfully it can come out in your photographs. So this exercise helps you to narrow down on your photography decisions so that your end result is cohesive, it looks intentional, it looks thought out, and it can actually transport your viewer by sending them that message that you want to communicate. That is what powerful storytelling is all about, right? Which takes us to step number 4. Now, step number 4 is all about the mood. So in step 4, you decide your mood. And this is where it all begins to come together. This is actually where we are switching from concept to execution because mood is all about lighting. All right. So we are getting a little bit real right now. And we just have to tell ourselves that we have to continue in a systematic way. We have to make this non-overwhelming. We do not want to be intimidated by this process. All right. So we take one small decision at a time and keep moving forward. All right. So we at this stage are thinking about the mood of the photo. Now, every food has a mood if you think about it, right? So cocktails are mostly like evenings. Tea could be morning or afternoon. Cakes are birthdays. Every food has a mood to it. And since you've already decided the intention of your photo, it is actually easier to decide the mood that best suits the emotion or the intent. All right. So there are different moods that you could think about. You could have a bright mood, moody, dark and moody, bright and moody, like literally whatever best supports your story. Now, mood is determined primarily by light, and we mostly, all of us, know that. So the deep dark shadows or bright light, or if you choose to use spotlight, or even the white balance like cool whites or warm whites, whatever the kind of light that you choose, it creates a mood. So think about the scene you're trying to create and which mood best complements it, right? So for me, I was creating a breakfast scene, and breakfast is eaten in the morning, which means that bright light was a complete go-to for me, and it would best actually complement my story. It's not just about it's not just about what I want. It's also about the story and what best complements it. I think that's something that we sometimes miss out. So we kind of have to keep reminding ourselves that we need to bring our attention back to what we have already established in step 1 and step 2. All right. So for me, breakfast scene would be bright light, and perhaps maybe adding a little hint of warm could give a sense of the sun coming up, and that would feel quite lovely. So it was clear to me that I wanted to create a bright photo without any extreme shadows and something that portrayed a fresh, crisp morning. That was the mood that I needed to achieve through my photo. All right, so once that was done, I was ready for step 5, and so are you right now. All right, so we go to step number 5. Step number 5 is all about color. We really need to choose a color scheme at this stage. Now, as much as storytelling lies in the power of light and the mood, it so heavily also falls back onto the color palette that we choose. Sometimes when you're watching TV and there are like certain colors and patterns that you see, especially in advertisements or maybe when you're watching a show, it makes you feel retro. It's the colors that make you feel retro and suddenly feel like you're back in the 60s. Or even black and white commercials, they literally transport you back to the 50s. Now, that's the power of color. It easily transports you in time and it translates a mood like no other, which is why do not take your colors lightly. Now, it is super easy to work with colors and we do not have to get overwhelmed by this. Just Google color wheel and then choose between 3 different options for your color scheme. So you can go either for an analogous color scheme, a complementary color scheme, or monotones. So analogous colors are basically the ones that are positioned next to each other in the color wheel. So if you have color wheel open in front of you right now, it'll be green and yellow. All right, so they are positioned next to each other. But then there are complementary colors that are positioned opposite to each other, like blue and yellow. And then there are monotones. So monotones pretty much gives away what it's all about, and it's shades of the same color. So you could have shades of yellow, like yellow ochre, royal yellow, lemon yellow. So different shades of the same color are monotones. And just use this color theory to make the decisions and think about how colors can communicate your story. All right, so it's super easy. Just use the color wheel, open it on your screen and think about it. It'll take you 5 minutes. So for my breakfast scene, I was to use bright light, right? And I also had croissants in the frame, and croissants are usually quite a nice like brown orange color. So I wanted to keep a very orange, brown and white palette. And because I knew that as soon as I would introduce another color, the impact of the orange brown would suddenly come down. It would get distributed between different other colors. So, and as I mentioned, that I actually wanted to bring some warmth to the frame, right? So the croissants were a really nice color to add that warmth to my story. So I decided to use shades of orange, yellow, white. I thought maybe adding a few berries would balance the white with a darker tone, dark blue, black, something like that. But I primarily wanted to stay in the warm, neutralish palette. And I thought that would make a strong color scheme and it would really bring out the timelessness of the book that my dad had gifted, because I was not introducing something extreme or something that would break away the whole warm and crisp intent that I had for the color scheme of this image. From there, we come on to the last piece of the puzzle, which is props and backdrops that every photographer loves. So we are at step number 6. And this is the time we choose props that work with the theme. So now props and backdrops, I know we love having fun with props and backdrops, but honestly, they can really make or break a story. They can really enhance the mood and the emotion. And so we really need to be very intentional and very carefully about of what we select. All right. So at this step, we already know our theme. We have given a name to it. So we kind of have to remember it when we are making our choices. So let's say your theme was luxe. So you know your prop choices would be a little bit more fancy, perhaps maybe like a crystal glass or a hand-cut crystal glass or plates, even plates with like a gold rim, something that looks posh. That's what luxe would be about. And even when we think about backdrops, it could be a marble backdrop, something that looks clean and shiny, or it could be a very beautiful motif tile. That would look luxe as well. But let's say your theme was rustic. Then you would think about imperfection and something you associate with a certain period in time. Perhaps something antique or reclaimed, like a handmade ceramics or copper, bronze glasses, or even when it comes to backdrop, you might consider thinking of natural wood or a chipped tile backdrop. So we really need to fall back on our theme and what we are trying to portray so that we can make the correct prop and backdrop choices. Going back to my breakfast photo, my theme was homely. So I chose props that someone could relate to, props that you would find in someone's home and on their breakfast table. All right. So I chose white plates with just a little bit texture so they would catch light. I also chose a wooden board for the bread, which we see most often in people's homes. And again, I went for small little simple white bowls for jam, butter, and I chose white as a neutral to enhance that bright morning feel, and also so that the colors of the croissants would really pop on that. So on white plates, the moment you put a orange croissant, that just pops. It looks beautiful and crisp. And I also chose a white wood backdrop because wood is such a common texture for dining tables, and particularly white wood, so that the croissants would pop and it would not contrast with the other components that I had in the frame, and it would just add so much to that bright photo. So I know that when we think of wood, we can have a dark brownish looking wood, but a white wood to me seemed bright. It would mean breakfast, and it would also add to my color palette, which is why I made that choice. So I created a composition with croissants and bread, and I set up a breakfast table kind of scene. So I added a few cups of tea, and then I literally brought my hands into the frame as though I was reading my dad's book while sipping tea, while munching on those croissants. And that photo expressed emotion, and the colors looked cohesive. And above all, it really conveyed the story, how I wanted my audience to experience it. So also, I have to be honest that this story was very literal, but there was a step-by-step approach that I used to create that particular photograph. I created a breakfast table like one would find a breakfast table. But sometimes our visual stories don't need to be that literal, and that's okay. We all have our own style. Sometimes they can be more abstract, sometimes they can be more conceptual, and I do that too. So for example, if you've been on my Instagram, you know that I recently took a photograph of these beautiful chocolates in vibrant colors and shapes. There were these hexagons and rounds, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. So it was a photo I took to talk about my birthday and my love for birthdays and how I was celebrating this year with chocolate. So my theme was fun. Surprise, surprise. So my theme was fun, and I named it Birthday Party. Again, a no-brainer, but it's all about making it easy for ourselves, right? So my theme was fun, and I named it Birthday Party. I chose a bright mood because birthdays are bright and cheerful. I also chose a fun, vibrant pink backdrop that complemented the red color of, those glossy chocolates, and all the props that I used were like golden. So we know that pink and yellow falls beautifully in the color wheel. Go check it out. And that's why I used golden candles, which contrasted beautifully with the pink. And so the colors were cohesive and the composition was really playful. There was a bit of mess, but it was controlled mess. And it seemed like it was the aftermath of a birthday party. And the entire frame was made of chocolates of different colors and sizes. And it looked whimsical. It looked like a scene from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So it wasn't literal. It wasn't like I put party caps or birthday presents, or I created a table of sorts. No, I didn't do any of that. It was a bit conceptual, but the picture still conveyed a mood. It still conveyed a story. It still conveyed the emotion of fun. And it was a visual story. So that's what I mean by it can be anything that you want, as abstract or as real as you want. So remember that this approach is a guide. It is not a rule. And like I always say, we are artists, we are free-spirited. I have shared this so that you actually have a step-by-step approach of breaking down things for yourself, not overwhelming yourself right in the beginning and being confused about how to make a certain photo look powerful through your visual storytelling. So if you just follow these few steps, you can actually take your decisions one by one and in a very systematic way so that you have a streamlined thought process, how to achieve your visual story, right? How to make it powerful, how to communicate it to your audience and what you want them to feel and how you can transport them into the scene. So these steps really help you to achieve all of that. So I'm just going to very quickly recap what we have done so far. So first we have determined the message or the emotion or the purpose of the photo, what we would like to communicate, right? Once that is set, we've established the most important food components of the photo, which we either need to buy or cook or prep. So then we come up with a theme and we give it an accurate name as close as possible to what we are imagining. All right. So once we have that theme, next we've decided the mood, which determines our lighting style and what it's going to make our audience feel. Once that is said, we think about our color palette and what colors will complement the light and the theme. And lastly, once we have all of that, we have established all the other components like the props and the backdrops that will create the powerful visual story that we want to create. So from there on, we execute our shoot. But there are certain things that I would really want you to bring your attention to. And that is, whenever we are creating a powerful visual story, it really needs to be cohesive. And I know that we like to use this prop and our new prop and this and a new backdrop and some new linen and whatever. We are very emotional about our props, but we have to make sure that our story is cohesive. That's what makes it powerful. So when the mood and the colors and the food and the props, they all come together effortlessly, that's what creates a powerful visual story. As you go through each of these steps, you must always have checkpoints for yourself and think about what you want the viewer to feel by looking at the picture. Constantly have that check for yourself. Am I on track? Is this what I wanted? And if not, step back, take a step back, take your decisions back and start a little bit again. And also having that vision before you begin a shoot, it'll help you save so much time. It'll make your decision making so much easier. And my last suggestion would be always use light to your advantage. It is your biggest strength in creating a visual story. Do not underestimate it. Do not think that your props and backdrops are more important than your light, because if your lighting is poor, you can have the fanciest props in your image, but they will not pop. They will not tell that story. So if your lighting is strong, you've nailed half of your story already. All right. So by following the systematic approach, it will become your second nature in time. I promise you. That's what happened to me. And the best part is you will be able to create such stories again and again and again with every single photo you take, because this is the process that you follow. You can this is what I do. So I also record my photography setup. So if you're placing your light or your light manipulators or your props or your color palette, whatever it is, take a quick picture and record it so that the next time you already have something handy, like, okay, here's what my lighting setup was. This is the kind of mood it created. This is what I want to replicate in my next photo as well. And it just becomes so much easier for you. You're so much more organized about it. So when we create with a vision and with intention, we have a higher chance of success. And I don't even need to tell you that. We don't just always need to wing it and see how things will play out and then keep working back and forth and hit and trial. We can be so intentional and we can save so much time and we can create such powerful visual stories, right? Because it's all about transporting your audience, and I can't say that enough. So even though your photo might be 2D, you can always make it 3D with good lighting, right? And then you can add a fourth dimension of emotion in it. Imagine how powerful that is. All right, guys. So all the photos that I've mentioned in this episode, I will be adding them to the blog post for this podcast. So head on over to myfoodlens.com and you can actually take a look at how the chocolate photo or the breakfast photo was executed. And hopefully that'll give you a better visual and understanding as you go through this podcast episode. But I hope that you find these tips useful. I hope that this step-by-step approach really helps you in streamlining your workflow and helps you in keeping your storytelling at the center of your photography, because as food photographers, we do have to work extra to create these stories, right? We have that little bit of extra responsibility. You know how to nail storytelling, and I can't wait to see your pictures. So if you use this approach, please do tag me on Instagram. Please tell me how they helped you. And if you found this episode useful, I would be so grateful if you could leave a review, subscribe on whichever platform that you are on, and especially if you're on Apple Podcasts, I would be so grateful if you could leave me a review and a rating. That would mean the world to me. All right, so off you go. Tell your stories, tag me in it. And if you have a question, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll be back next week with yet another episode. Until then, bye-bye.